Hello. Welcome to this Hunt Scanlon webinar on connecting talent to value. Together with Shefali Salwan, and I'll introduce her in a moment, I will be your host in this session. I'm Hein Knaapen. I'm the European partner in CEO.works, leading our European franchise. I'm a lifetime HR guy, having spent now 38 years in HR, of which 36 years in big corporates, and of which 14 years as a chief HR officer. And together with me in this session is Shefali Salwan. Shefali is one of the co-founders of CEO.works, and Shefali's got an over 25 years experience as a mentor, as a coach, as a talent manager, as a thinker and practitioner on leadership development and assessments. And she's worked with C-suite over 5 continents. I think that qualifies us for the conversation we're going to have with you. And before I'm going to share with you what exactly we would like to discuss, I've got a few housekeeping topics. First is, if you have questions, and we hope you will have many of those, go to the Q&A section. Don't go to the chat function, go to the Q&A section. And at the end of the webinar, we'll have sufficient time to deal with all the questions and answers you have come up with. Then Hunt Scanlon asked me to alert you to a real life event in New York City, 19th of May, on talent. And so you may find it interesting if you are around to join that session as well. So what are we going to discuss with you? We'd like to first explain you the talent to value practice as we've coined it, and its underpinning thinking with examples. And then once we've done that, which will be taken care of by myself, then I will hand over to Shefali, who will go into the application of this thinking in management assessments. And as you will find out, those are very unconventional management assessments. So let's go to the next page. If you look at the success formula in PE, there is a very clear one. And here are its main elements. So when a PE firm is to acquire and has acquired a new portfolio company, there will be a value creation plan, which is all-encompassing, very detailed, very risk-aware, very thorough. And the other element is the PE firm will give much attention to the C-suite selection. And then a third element is, once the C-suite is there, once the value creation plan is there, there is very tight performance management. And all of that is underpinned by a highly appropriate management incentive plan. And having been around in corporates most of my life, I envy PE for this formula. It works extremely well. It is tight, it is well-timed. And rather than paying people for supposed market value, you pay people for creating value. So it makes a lot of sense, and there's a lot we can learn from PE on how to lead our businesses. However, something is not going entirely well. The next slide, please. Can we have the next slide? Okay. So if you look at the CEO churn in PE companies, it is significant, and it's way out of whack with what you would expect. So we looked into this ourselves some 6 years ago, and then we found out that on average, when a PE firm has acquired a company, in about 2 years, the CEO is asked to leave with a failure rate of 56%. And then Alex and Partners, they did similar research a few years ago, and they looked at the CEO turnover through life, and over the entire investment horizon, coming to 73%. So that is not what it should be, obvious. Now, we've been thinking, and on the basis of our long experience in companies, in corporates, and long experience in working with PE, here is, here is what we see. Investment decisions by PE firms and by big corporates are being taken with rigor, with great risk awareness, and on a strong base of evidence. And that's what it should be. And if you talk people decisions, you take decisions about roles that are important, very often people, leaders, PE firms immediately start thinking people. But a role, a critical role, is not a person. A critical role is an investment decision. And it should be taken with the commensurate rigor, thoroughness, and risk awareness that you also see in investment decisions. That's one observation that explains, we think, the above average churn. The other is, we understand the great attention that is being given to C-suite selection, but that is importance on the basis of hierarchy. How about looking at criticality of roles in terms of the value they create? If you would make a list, and that's what we often do, of roles that are the most critical for the value creation you've invested for, you get to a very different list from when you look at the most important roles as defined by hierarchy. So where we come in and work with leaders in PE, that is to translate the value creation ambition into concrete, selective decisions about roles and people that do the heavy lifting of the value creation invested for. So how do we do that? Let's go to the next slide. So we insert in the success recipe of the PE firm, we insert a talent to value plan, where we look at the roles that have the most critical contribution to the value creation, and they will be dispersed over the very many layers of the company. And in those roles, we will identify the 3 to no more than 5 critical deliverables with timing and money that drive value creation for the company. And here is what it looks like if we go to the next slide. This is a process we have developed. It's a practical process. It's not rocket science, nor is it a religion. It's a deeply practical process, which we've come to on the basis of our own experience. And I'll explain.
And Hein, does it make sense for you to just go a little bit deeper on how we have, with all our years of experience in academy companies, but having experimented this and done, maybe 200 of these projects in private equity, how we've come up with this, some background on that origin?
So what do you mean? So I'm happy to go to anything you want, but tell me yourself, Shefali, you're deep into this as well.
No, and when I was listening to you, of course, we have a whole lot of practitioner experience. CEO.works has folks like you who have, led HR functions for, for instance, you have 3 CHRO experiences you had in large companies. But when I think about talent to value and its and how it was and how we've perfected it, I think we're still learning through it. But it is, the framework is really born from the fact that as we got into private equity situations where, to your point, HR folks like you and me are really asked the question that how is HR processes, rather than it being for excellence, how is it really connected to value? And one of the things that we have developed this in is the fact that Sandy, our founder, was in Blackstone, where he was doing 100 transformations at the same time in a very much private equity kind of a backdrop. And that's when I think the HR processes that we have used forever kind of got chiseled into this framework. So I just wanted to share that.
You know, that's a very good point, and that's an absolutely strong point you're making. And that is, the point is that, as everyone that joins this conversation will recognize, big corporates and small corporates have organizational dynamics that do not foster focus. There's all kinds of people in companies that with all the greatest intentions want to do everything at the same time, and while that energy and that dedication is to be applauded, it is just often questionable whether that really drives the performance of the company. And that's what you refer to, and you're totally right there, Shefali. What we have found out by trial and error, and with successes and failures, it is focus makes the world go round, so to say. It's the tight link between what you decide on people with company performance. That's what drives first the value creation, and that's what drives down the time to value. That's probably the point. Yeah, exactly. Very good. So it's 5 steps, and I'll get into those in some more detail in a few moments. And those are 5 reductive steps. First, it's the value agenda. You know the ambition in numbers, the ambition for value creation. But then you can bring that down to the 4 or 5 spots in your company where 75 to 80% of the value creation sits. And you have to believe us for a moment, this is invariably true. We have never come across companies where it didn't hold that in 4, 5, or 6 spots, 75% of the value creation sits. So that's the first reduction. The second reduction is then where are the jobs that really do the heavy lifting for that value creation? There are only a few, and they are dispersed over the layers in the organization. And I'll show you in a moment. And in a third reduction step, then we'll start looking at each of those roles as investments. What exactly is the value to be created by that role? What are the 3 or 4 deliverables in order to create that value? What are the risks around that role, irrespective of the person in the role? And how does the person, either in the role or the person you're considering for the role, how do they measure up against all those requirements? And if you do that across a company, you can also identify patterns of risk you may want to identify. And once you know all that, you get into a very focused, very selective mobilization plan, where you focus on the most important interventions to be made in order to set up those role talent combinations for delivery. So it's moving from big transformations to microsurgery in a certain way. And if I go to the next slide, so we've got some slowness in the system, I think. Can we have the next slide? Yes, here we are. This is what it looks like. This is an anonymized example of a company I've worked with. And it's if you look at the right-hand upper corner, as long as that is a graph on value and time axes. The horizontal axis being the time, the vertical axis being the value. As long as your results develop according to expectations of the market, not a great lot will change to the value of your company. You won't create a lot of value because all the results are being expected and have been factored into the share price. So you have to invest for what we would call a bend the curve case, like investing for significant value creation. And as I said, what we do is we would sit with the CEO and the CFO and the CHRO, and we'd identify those 4, 5, or 6 spots where most of the value creation sits. And this is what it looked like. This is a health tech company I worked with. So those are the different buckets of value creation. And you see they're all sizable relative to the size of the company. So that's stage 1, the value agenda, or what we would say as well, the value bridge, the bridge between the current value and the future value. Now, once you've done that, and let's go to the next slide. And good, and I should emphasize before I go there that this establishing this value agenda, that is first and foremost a matter of alignment and of focus. And here's why. You've got the investment thesis. The PE firm has decided on the basis of the investment thesis to buy the company. And there's a lot of assumptions there and a lot of ambitions there. And once you have bought the company, the management team will make a management case, which will probably directionally be the same, but not entirely be the same. There are differences there. And then you appoint a CEO, and he will have his own views, and they will be directionally similar, but not exactly the same. And that's why the value creation plan, which being created, yet present a slightly different view. They all head in the same direction, but are not similar. But in order to drive down time to value and drive up value, you need utter alignment on what you're going to go after and what not. So that is the main purpose and the main virtue of the value agenda, is to get to an utter focus on the few things you're going to work on, and to get alignment among the main players on what to go after. So that's the importance of the value agenda. And what we see is we often work, and Shefali, you may want to comment there as well, we often work with companies that ask us to use bits and pieces of this process. And since it's no religion, that will always be possible. And we would always say, you have to start with your value agenda, because that creates the alignment and the focus you need for full effect. Anything you'd like to add here, Shefali?
Yeah, so this is fascinating, Hein. As you know, I've just come out of another capability workshop that I was leading, and often my corporate clients, folks like how you and me have grown up in the last 40 years, our corporate clients will say that private equity has a big advantage on this particular step, because somebody, typically a strategy consultant, has really thought through what is that investment thesis or the value bridge, and how is it going to go from value today to value tomorrow. So the bricks on that waterfall chart, people have thought through. And I can tell you that my learning for the last, the studies that we do with our clients, your point about alignment is absolutely true. So even in a company which is owned by a portfolio company which is owned by private equity, when we start digging into the strategy on a page, which is like the investment or value bridge, there will be time frame. Some people think of it as 3 years. Some people think of it as 4 years. The investment thesis is different from the management case, sometimes different from how the CEO is building that organization, or so we have understood that alignment is a big piece, which if you work on today will save you time tomorrow.
Yes, absolutely.
And it is where we play. I mean, if you think about it, human capital, we are not going to decide strategy, but we can definitely play a big role in getting people aligned.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And it's interesting to emphasize, we are not strategists. We are in strategy deployment. Or put it differently, we are into creating as much value as possible. That's the value. In as short time as possible. That's the time to value, with as few interventions as possible. And why is that? There's already so much on the plate of every executive. It'd be preferable to boil down your value creation challenge to as few priorities and as few interventions as possible. So let's go on to the next slide. So once you've identified your value agenda, you have identified your hotspots. So those are the spots, often junctions of geography and technology or whatever. And now you're going in the next step, you're more or less going to drop a table on the value hotspot. So that is the table of the roles that do the heavy lifting of the value creation. And here's a simple way, and it's a bit too simple, and we do it more thoroughly, but a very simple way to explain it is, if you're the CEO and in integrated solutions, the money doesn't come in timely, you call an MT member. You know who to call. Now, then you can get two answers. The MT member can tell you, I don't know why. I don't know why the money doesn't come in. I'll have to ask. Then you're sure that role is not a critical role. But you will get in the end to someone who can explain to you and will say, yes, you're right, the money didn't come in, but that role didn't deliver, and that role didn't deliver. And that gives you a fair feeling for the critical roles that drive the value creation in that value hotspot. So in this second step, we would look at the roles that actually themselves do the heavy lifting of the value creation you've invested for. And because of that, you shouldn't be surprised that most of those roles don't sit on executive level, but below. So that's about the table and the critical roles as the next step. And then once you have done that, and that brings us to the next slide, then you go to the next simplification step, the next reduction step. You start looking at individual roles and the talents either in the role or the talents you are looking at. And what you're doing is exactly in the same spirit, identifying with timing and numbers, what are the 3 or certainly no more than 5 jobs to be done, critical deliverables that have to be made in order to create that value. And once you've done that, you go on the left hand, you start looking at what design risks are here, irrespective of the person in the role. Does that role have sufficient authority to decide? Or is the authority totally dispersed over many roles? Does that role have sufficient capacity? And by that we mean budget, the right sort of people with the right capabilities. Does the role itself have sufficient time to focus on these deliverables? And a third lens prism to look at the role and design risks would be, is this role well positioned? Is it well compensated in order to find the talents you need for delivery? And a fourth prism would be, is there sufficient alignment around what needs to be delivered? Or is there great resistance? And you can easily see if you have designed a role or identified a role that is critical value creation, but there's great resistance around that role about delivery, then whatever talent you appoint in that role is always going to fail. And so those design risks, those role risks are essential for the mitigation plan that will follow. And in our experience, Shefali, you may add your views as well. In our experience, over many years of HR, when people underperform in roles, most often it's not because they are poor talents. Most often it's because of design risks in the role that were not properly identified. And once we have done this, only then we will start looking at the talent we consider for the role. And line by line, job to be done by job to be done, we will identify whether the talent is up to the challenge on the basis of evidence and not on the basis of opinions. So Shefali, I'm sure you want to add some here.
Yeah, so there's a question in the Q&A here, Hein, which says, is asking, saying that how does this align with traditional talent management practices? I definitely want you to answer that because it's key. And I think to your point, meeting after meeting with different clients, just yesterday, I was talking to a client late in my New York time, but that client is in Australia. And when I was explaining to him the fact that 70% of the execution risks lie outside of the talent. And when you put yourself in the shoes, we all have been in these situations. You know, we kind of blame the talent very often, saying, okay, the value did not get delivered. But guess what? Our study and our research is that if you haven't thought through the jobs to be done properly, and you haven't enabled the role and designed it in a way there is no drag for the talent to deliver, you may put Hein or you may put Shefali, we will both fail.
Yeah.
And it is fascinating to me that I get so much feedback on this particular slide because it's true. Everybody has experiences from their own life and their own work life where, we just haven't put the discipline on enabling the talent to do well.
Yeah.
So this is, for me, I think
well said.
it's a crux of it all.
Yes, well said, absolutely well said. So let's go on to the next slide. So here is where your part starts, Shefali. So we've had now a high-level explanation of the talent to value practice. There's more detail there, and if you look at our website, you will see more detail, and we'd be happy to engage in conversations with you if you're interested. But I think this high-level explanation will suffice to provide the background to the example that you are going to deal with, Shefali.
Yeah, and this application of talent to value for me, and we'll of course talk about it together, Hein, is really using talent to value as a philosophy in different use cases or different applications in human capital. And in the case that I'm going to walk through is actually a leadership strength assessment kind of study. And what we were able to do in this case, it was a portfolio company which was nearing an exit from one private equity to another. So basically, they were going to go through an exit, and when they came to us, the question they had was, we have spent a lot of energy and deliberate thought on upgrading our leadership strength. So they had recruited many folks, and their view was that they wanted an independent kind of an assessment from outside to say, is this team a good team? Because that's what they wanted to go and tell their next buyer, saying that, we have done a lot of work in our C-suite recruitment. And of course, because we are the talent to value company, we don't do assessments in that way. We say, actually talent to value, it's all about the fact of understanding the value agenda. So this was, in this case, the value agenda of this BPO company. And they had, of course, many clients, but the way they were going to make their money and their investment thesis was that they were going to grow in the next phase. They were going to go from an enterprise value of around 340 million to $1 billion. And we really needed to understand how that value bridge is going to be. Where is the concentrations of value? And remember that we don't do just an assessment of C-suite members, because that's not what we believe in. We believe that value gets created in different, it's not hierarchical. In fact, there are critical roles, which may be N-2 or N-3. So that was our entire work that we did with this company. And once we understood this value agenda, so there was a concentration of value from healthcare. That was a domain that they played in quite a bit. And even in the future, that's a big concentration of value hotspot for them. New logos and really looking for new clients was another big area where there was going to be future value. It was an acquisitive company. They'd already done 3 before, and they were going to acquire more companies as they grew as a platform. There was something specific around overhead costs. So there was a productivity play as well. That was another concentration of value. There was certain domains of technology which they were going to get into. So that was another aspect. And there was going to be some play around moving from certain regions of the world to another region. So all of this kind of showed them their plan from getting from 340 million to $1 billion. And our job was, okay, so if we understand that this is the ambition, we don't stop there, right? We try and understand what is the work, because once you understand from strategy to understanding the chunky pieces of work, only then would we know which are those roles which are adjacent, where there's going to be value creation. And Hein, you know this, we play a little bit of a game with a lot of clients who will come and tell us, I know what the critical roles are, and it's typically in the top end of the organization. And in this case too, we had a little bit of this conversation where the founder CEO told me, I know exactly which roles you should look at, these 10 roles which are going to make all the value. And I said, I'm going to first understand the work. And when we did that, we did realize that it wasn't the 10 roles that he was talking about. There were actually 17 roles that were going to make 80% of the value. There was, of course, some kind of intersection between his list and my list, but mine was obviously based on what the work was. But when we did that leadership strength of those critical roles, Victor, if you can go to the next slide, please. Yeah, so what we were really trying to do was we were trying to drop the table, like the metaphorical table, Hein, that you were talking to, right? That each value hotspot has certain roles where they are obviously very adjacent to where the value is getting created, or those roles are dependent on some other function. So for example, if you are going to do, changing location, and if that's a value hotspot, finance function was obviously responsible because they were going to do all the analysis of it, but they were dependent on the facilities. So the facilities role also became really a critical role. So that's how we kind of dropped these tables. And as you know, that our assessment is not a talent assessment. We know 70% of the execution risk lies outside of the talent. So the talent to value process of assessing is really looking at the role talent click. Yeah. It's understanding the jobs to be done. It's understanding how the role is being designed, and then looking at the talent. So everything is based on this, what we call the role talent card, which, as you can see on this slide, is the foundation. It's the middle. It's the heartbeat of the heart.
Absolutely. Shefali, what we, in addition to your point, what we see, if we look back at our own careers, that we know examples of formidable talent management, formidable development, and formidable assessments. There's nothing wrong with those. But you could also say they are almost exclusively focused on the supply side of the talent management process, which is the person. That's important. We focus on what has been not been focused sufficiently on it. That is the demand side. How exactly does this role link to value creation? And that becomes the lens, the exclusive lens, to look at people rather than making all-encompassing views on people. That may be interesting in themselves, but that often lack the focus of the link to what needs to be delivered.
Absolutely. And Victor, if you just go to the next slide, I'll talk through this. Of course, this was the executive summary of the assessment. Please, I think it's really important that we never talk about whether the talent is good or bad. We say, what is the probability of value arriving in this critical role? Because we've understood the jobs to be done. We've understood how the role enables the work to be done. And then how does the talent match with what is required? So it's always about value at risk and execution risk. It's never about good talent, bad talent, Hein is good, Shefali is not good, etc. It's never about that. Victor, if you just go to the next slide, we put a lot of energy in understanding the role and the work itself. What are the things where there is risk? And you mentioned the 4 aspects that we look at the role level. We are obviously looking at, based on those jobs to be done and the outcomes you're looking for, does the role even have the decision rights or the authority to do that? Or is that a risk? Does it have the budgets, the focus, the FTE, all of that to enable the outcomes? Or is there a risk to that? Attractiveness, are you really paying for value in this kind of a role? And then what is the drag? What is the cultural resistance or any other resistance that this role will get? And it's nothing to do with Hein or Shefali. It's anybody who comes on this role will have the same drag or resistance. So we put a lot of energy in our assessment on the role side and seeing whether it's enabled for success. And only then we look at the talent and looking for evidence for talent. So Victor, if you can go to the next slide, please. No, I think there was one which got missed. If you can.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is the role side, and then there's the talent side. So I wanted to give this juxtaposition here because we never just look at talent. We look at the role and then we look at the talent.
We have to show the, yeah, here we are. Very good. Yeah, this is the one you wanted to discuss. Yeah, yeah.
And I think that's where we stand out, is because we will not go and tell a client, in this case as well, that, hey, you know, these people are not good or bad. We just say, what do you think as a CEO, what should you, from what we have seen as a probability of value to arrive in these roles, right? And then I do want to show something else as well, because when we do this assessment, we get assessments at 3 levels. We get assessment at the role level, which we've just shown. Victor, if you go to the next one, we get a really good understanding of what are the execution risks, even in those metaphorical tables. This is the bricks on that value bridge, or what Hein was talking about on a value hotspot. We can also look at, so this particular table, for example, or, you know, was around operations. And we realized that one of the transformations they were doing in this organization was, it's a BPO company. They were going to do farming. So they have hunting, of course, for new logos. But the farming aspect with their existing clients, the job was going to be moved from their sales department to their operations department. And that was new work. And we understood that, oh my God, this is new work. So we asked the question, is the organization or the team enabled for success in that new job? And it became really clear that there were some execution risks on that table itself. So it allowed us to really think about, you know, using all aspects of our evidence mosaic. So Hein, you know this, that we never do any assessment, which is just an interview, or you know,
Exactly.
so we do multiple things. We do interviews, we do stakeholder information, we do 360s, we even do some psychological assessments to kind of connect the dots for us. And so we use all this evidence mosaic, as we call it, to answer that one question: what is the value at risk?
Yeah. And this is very important. So it's multiple source information we bring together. And the other point is that we force ourselves, and we are in our team, we're having heated conversations on that. We force ourselves to be as bold in our observations and as simple as possible, because you can get lost in complexity and in multiplicity of observations. But if you're not able to bring it down to a few conclusions, then you fail to drive action. That's the one element of this.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, your challenge is always a good one, because how do you keep it, you know, very evidence-based, Hein? And that's what we are trying to do all the time. But I also want to show you a third assessment that we are able to do. So one is on the role side, one is at the value hotspots. And Victor, if you go to the next slide. Yeah, so we also, because we are able to do such detailed pixelated work on the work itself, the roles, as well as the talent, we can get a dashboard like this on the left-hand side, which will say, in this particular case, these are the critical roles. This is 80% of the value will get delivered from these critical roles. They are not hierarchical, but if you stack it against each other as like a deck of cards, you get a lot of information. So this one, the positive thing that we saw was that actually, unlike many organizations that we work with, Hein, you know that as well, with lots of scars on our backs, there was amazing alignment of the work required in each of the roles. So what that meant was that the line leader and what the incumbent said on what is the work outcomes that is is going to create value was 88% aligned, which is fantastic, because you can imagine that less value will get leaked because there is so much alignment. So we were able to show that in this particular case. We were also able to show that they have, over the last 2-3 years, they were very proud of the fact that they had done a lot of work on hiring some senior people, but they'd also worked on their compensation, rewards, etc. So these roles were being paid for value. But what we were able to also show that from a capacity perspective, there were some big risks, not just in the senior levels, but it was the ecosystem of these critical roles. And you could, from a capability perspective, and we were able to pixelate certain capabilities. So demand planning was one of them, which is very, very specific. So you can do something with these insights and make it really actionable. So we got a whole lot of information. And you'll probably remember this, but we were happy to say that this particular portfolio company, while they were pretty anxious because we went through so much detail, they were actually, when they were selling and they were exiting, they got a very good valuation, partly because they were able to tell their new buyers that they had done so much work. And even though there were risks, they had plans and they already started mitigating for some of those risks. So it's all about knowing the risks and mitigating for it, rather than it being, in something which you don't know, but they are all knowable. So I think our work kind of allows you to look at risk in a different way. Is that it's not bad. It's good to know your risks.
Yeah, precisely. Precisely. Only if you know it, you can mitigate it. And here's the other thing, Shefali, so look at what you did here, what we did here. It's so obviously tightly linked to business targets that it suddenly turns into a conversation that that everyone finds relevant. So it stops being HR babble and it becomes business language.
Yes. So, there's this question about how is it different from normal talent management. I do want to raise that. So very, very good question. What we do, talent to value has a big bias to be on from the demand side. It's, to your point, it's very much what are the business goals, what are the results, right? But this is not going to replace all the supply side amazing work which happens in organizations, which we are used to, right? The traditional talent management needs to happen because you're working a lot on the supply side, etc. And so I wouldn't say that talent to value should replace traditional talent management. In fact, it should work together with it. So that's one thing. And the second point I wanted to say is that exactly what you said, Hein. I think talent to value allows business leaders and finance folks and HR folks to have conversations in the same swim lane. Otherwise, you're having a separate conversation on talent, you're having a separate conversation on operating rhythm of the organization and finance and budgets. And we are trying to put it all together. So I think that is what we have seen.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. There was one question in the question answer section, which was, how do you allocate value to non-revenue roles? And that's interesting, Shefali, to think about that. And I remember working with a health tech company where there was a serious change of required abilities in a part of the organization that was obviously not available in the remainder of the company because it was so new. And that made it very clear that the head of people attraction, who reported to the chief HR officer, became a critical role. But then we exactly had this conversation. How do you allocate value to this role? And the way we looked at it, and I'm sure it makes sense to you, is so we know that in this hotspot we wish to create that and that value. We know it is deeply dependent on bringing in new talent. And then the business conversation was, so what do we think which part of the value creation is being done by new talents that we bring in. There are no objective answers, but if 3 business people around the table agree about, for example, 30% of the value that we wish to create will come from new talents, then you've put a number to the deliverables of the head of talent attraction. So it's not mathematics, but in this way of looking at this non-revenue role, you get very close to the value it creates. So that's the way we found to deal with numbers to non-revenue roles. Would you have any additional comment there, Shefali?
No, it's perfect, Hein, exactly how we do it. That's our methodology. I wonder if we go back to your slide, Hein, the one that you were showing on that metaphorical table. We can just talk it through. Yeah. Victor, it's right in the beginning.
Yes.
I think one before, right? So where you had that, okay, sorry. Yes. Hein, do you want to talk about this? Because I think exactly what you said would have shown up here, right?
Exactly. So here the company wished to move from a series of product offerings to offer integrated solutions to the customers. But that they hadn't done before. It was new. It was really new to them. But it was not only developing those solutions, it was also monetizing them. It's all nice to build new solutions, but if the client doesn't want to pay for it, that's of no use. And so in this example, we introduced a new role, which we typically find, Shefali, if we are when we are across clients, we would typically say expect 20 to 25% of roles to be new. And you shouldn't be surprised because it's about new value. And in this case, it was a head of order to cash, a new role. But the other is the solution sales training lead. So that is a new role. You have to train people to sell solutions rather than to sell products. And so in the same vein, we looked at, for integrated solution, what part of the value we are going to create will sit with new skills for salespeople, and that gets you to the number you attach to such a role.
Yeah. And Hein, you know that I love those trick questions we sometimes use, right? Well, they're proxy questions, but you know your point about if the money is not arriving and the CEO is calling a role, right? One of the people in this role, and they don't have the answer, then they're not close enough to the work.
Yes, exactly.
I love that. And when you actually get to the person who is closest to the work, if the value is not arriving, they're giving excuses. What are those excuses? They typically will give excuses like, oh my God, there's not enough capability, sales training is not happening, or Hein as the HR person is not getting new people for us. So that's how you get critical roles, because,
yes, totally
that's how
right.
Interdependent organizations, right? We are obviously dependent on other roles to deliver.
There are 2 new questions, Shefali, that are interesting to deal with here. One question is, who would be the key people to participate in this process? Can you comment?
Yes. So Hein, you know, I have a strong view on this. And I feel that our normal instinct is to make this a much bigger exercise. And our learnings have always been to keep it really small. Typically, this is an exercise of the business head, maybe the finance person, and the HR head. And we're not suggesting you democratize this too much, because it becomes very, very political very quickly. A bit like an acquisition. You don't go and tell everybody what acquisitions you're doing because it's privileged information. So at least that's our learning, is that before you can go and cascade it, please keep it really small and see for your organization and your culture if that works.
And and Shefali, it is a top-down process. It's the view of the CEO of the business of what is possible and what's not. And we totally respect at every level of the organization, of the company, you have people that make an important contribution to value creation, but taking the view from the perspective of the business lead gets you furthest in identifying priorities. Now, the next question that was on is, how about cost saving initiatives into the value bridge? And it's simple. Cost savings can create a lot of value. And you can have these cost savings that the market expects you to do. And so that are already factored into your share price. Forget about those. But you could see how in getting it to significant more value, taking out costs leaves you more money to invest, and is an important value creator. So whatever contributes to a better bottom line and a better multiple, so to say, can be a value creator. Right. Is there any? I'm just making sure that I am not forgetting anything. No. We have dealt with questions so far. Would there be any concluding thinking, Shefali, we would like to leave people with?
Yeah, Hein, I'm sorry, I'm going to borrow something that you say a lot, and it really appeals to me, which is that on an everyday basis, most of our organizations, there is just too much. It's almost like a conspiracy of doing too much all at once. And you often say that the ability to focus and get really the most important things done is very, very important. So talent to value for me is those reductionist steps in the beginning to make sure that you're focusing the mind is very important. Because if you don't do that well, I think then this cannot really become a talent allocation tool.
Yes, you're totally right. And here's the point that holds for you and for me as well, Shefali. We're easily excitable. We like new stuff, and we're curious about new things. And that's laudable, and I hope we will never unlearn that. But you have to be aware that in big corporates and in companies of almost any size, if you allow that too often to happen, you just lose the focus. And it sounds very unsexy to bang the drums of focus. And the only comfort I can give you, it is very sexy to create value in the company, even if you think it's a little bit boring to focus on a few priorities. So very few things are as sexy as creating value, because value, it's expressed in money, but really it is increased relevance for your customers and increased relevance for your stakeholders. That's the nice thing to keep in mind, I think.
Yeah, I think that for me is an important mantra.
Yeah, exactly. So I think we're at the end of this. So I've been checking questions. I don't think there are any more questions. So let's complete this session. Is that okay, Shefali?
Yes, absolutely.
So thanks a lot for being with us, and thanks for asking incisive questions. We hope you've liked it, and we wish, of course, you give this a thought. And if at any time you would feel like having an extra conversation, you know where to find us. So thanks a lot and have a great day.
And thank you. Thank you.